Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome back, everybody. On Friday, New York Congressman Brandon Williams and Virginia Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, both Republicans, introduced the Respecting the First Amendment on Campus Act in an attempt to combat the stifling of free speech at so many colleges across this country. The new bill would mandate schools to protect students and faculty members' First Amendment rights or risk losing their Title IX funding, which makes up a big part of college and university budgets. Joining us now to talk more about this is one of the great champions of campus free speech, campus reform, higher education fellow, and good friend of ours, Nick Giordano. By the way, if you haven't got his podcast, the best in the country, be sure to listen to it. Nick, it's good to have you back on.
Thank you for having me, John.
There's nothing like the power of the purse string to get someone's attention. And I think over the last few months, colleges have gotten several rude awakenings. The first came from donors saying, if you don't stop this anti-Semitism stuff, we're cutting you off. Now, House Republicans saying, hey, if you don't start protecting the speech of every person on campus, you could lose your Title IX funds, which, by the way, make up a big chunk of their change. Is this an effective bill if it gets passed?
Well, to me, this whole thing's extraordinary because as a political scientist, we shouldn't even need a bill like this. We have a Constitution and we have a Bill of Rights. Yeah. And in the First Amendment, it's pretty clear, especially considering that we're talking about public institutions. And so you would think that public institutions would respect the establishment of free speech. But as a campus reform higher education fellow, and given all the reporting we've done on the attacks on free speech, this is a necessary bill because free speech is not being respected on college campuses. And our country relies on the concept of free speech. We are the only country in the entire world that has this concept built in to protect our right to speak freely without any type of fear of reprisals. Unfortunately, our higher education institutions aren't respecting that. And it goes against the doctrine of higher education in the first place, right? Debate and dialogue are essential to get to the truth. And that's what higher education exists for. Unfortunately, they have deviated from that long ago. And instead, they want to silence and censor anyone and anything that they deem as harmful or offensive or hateful. And that's in the eye of the beholder, right? These are the same people that say words are violence. But if I call for, let's say, enhanced border security, well, then they label that as hatred of immigrants. So I think this is a necessary bill, and there's nothing that get the colleges moving than when you threaten the funding.
Yeah, for sure.
Education is getting pushback on your own ideas and having to question them and make form a reasonable argument. There is something else that this ties into, and it is our immigration system. And I know that you recently wrote an op-ed, Biden's border crisis exposes a toxic education system. Can you peel back the layers of this onion for us?
Absolutely. When it comes to the immigration crisis and our open border, a lot of people are focusing on what's going on in the cities as it pertains to tax dollars being used for housing and food and just the large numbers coming. But people aren't paying attention to the number of unaccompanied minors and minors that are coming in family units. And we're talking about well over 1 million children, 400,000 being unaccompanied minors. And this has several levels to it. First of all, we are a humane nation. And if children are in the United States, we want them to be in schools to get educated rather than be on the streets. But it costs a lot of money to educate those children. In New York City alone, 30,000 unaccompanied minors enrolled in the school system in just 1 year. It costs $38,000 per student per year in this school system. In Denver, we're seeing 300 enrollments per week. The education system cannot sustain that large of a number of people enrolling in such a short period of time, and then at the same time expect that the quality of education isn't going to decline. It certainly is. That should be obvious to everyone. What I fear, though, happens to impact national security even more. These students came to this country and they were told that this is a country that you're in charge of your own destiny, that you have the way to make it in the United States, to elevate your life and your lifestyle. Just get an education and you can succeed and thrive, and it's the freest and open country in the world. However, when they get here, they're going to go through an education system that actually bashes the United States, that promotes anti-Americanism, promotes anti-Semitism, promotes the idea of victimhood and oppressed. They're going to be told that they are going to be victims in this system. And just to give an example, all we have to do is look at the New York State Board of Regents Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Framework, where in this framework, they state that the police are hunting down Black and brown people. They state that every aspect of our lives, we see systemic racism being infused, from education to healthcare to infrastructure to the government itself. And so these students are going to be taught to despise the United States. How can they gain a sense of loyalty? Who would want to be loyal to a country that espouses hate, that espouses racism? And so you're going to see an entire generation that grows detached. Now, the shame of it is that our education system used to be the harbinger of assimilation into the country. Right. Those that are coming here, they adopt to American culture. They shed some of their cultures. And that's the way it's always been. It's the idea of the melting pot. However, our college universities, as we've been reporting at Campus Reform for over a decade, have decided that the melting pot is a racist microaggression. And so no longer should the cultures that are coming here adapt to American culture. Now America must adapt to the cultures that are coming here, turning us into a tribal society. And this goes to the warnings of George Washington, who said assimilation is going to be the only thing that actually makes this country work. You have Teddy Roosevelt, who warned that we don't want to turn into a nation of, quote, squabbling nationalities. And that's what our education system's pushing, and it's really dangerous.
There was a moment, Nick, and by the way, that was an excellent analysis. I think I've heard a lot of people say we're doing reverse assimilation now, and that is a scary thought to think about. There's a moment where someone who's reached the highest court in the land, Ketanji Brown Jackson, actually suggested during a debate this week that the First Amendment was a sad impediment to government. In other words, it's getting in the way of government. I think that's what the Founding Fathers intended, but she saw it as an obstacle. What message does that send to all the young people who aspire one day to be a lawyer, to be a judge, a justice, to hear somebody here actually think that one of the inalienable rights we were granted in our Constitution is an impediment?
Yeah, and her specific word she used was that it hampers the government, right? It restrains the government. And I'm sitting there listening to the line of questioning, and I'm like, well, that's actually the whole intent of it. Yeah. Our Constitution and our Bill of Rights are the most unique documents in the entire world. And they're not just documents. It's a way of life here in the United States. The Founding Fathers created something that's different. We are one of the youngest countries in the world, yet we have the oldest codified constitution of the world. And it speaks volumes. And the reason it has survived so long is because our Constitution was developed to restrain government power. The government doesn't grant us our rights or liberties. These are God-given inherent rights that we have. And the Founding Fathers understood the threat that government always poses to these rights. So you have a Supreme Court justice that's saying, no, we should err on the side of the government as opposed to the people. And it actually deviates from a lot of the longstanding traditions when it comes to free speech. I mean, this is where we saw Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg actually meet on a lot of issues. It was always free speech that they always joined together in their decisions for the most part. So when we have a Supreme Court justice that doesn't realize the importance of the Constitution, it reminds me of the failed education system that doesn't really teach about American history, our founding, our documents, and American civics. If I ask my students, well, how do you have your rights? Most would say, prior to getting to my class, once they get to my class, they know. But prior to getting to my class, most would say that it's government that is actually granting them their rights. Yeah. And that's the threat that we're under. Yeah.
Nick, we're going to lose you just because we're going to hit a commercial break. Somewhere along the way, inalienable rights became inconvenient rights for the left. How about that? What a great session. Nick, everyone, go check out his amazing podcast. We'll be right back with a great conversation about your liver.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.